need to fill in on those two. Those will be very helpful. And if we lift off on time, we'll have plenty of cryo to be able to do that. Like I mentioned, EVAs, we have 4 of them on this mission. You're gonna see us use a new pre-breathe protocol. Pre-breathe is what we have the crew do. It's a lot like when you're scuba diving. The guys who go out in their suits go to pressure. We have the suits at a lower pressure rather than atmospheric, 14.7 psi. So we need to purge the nitrogen out of their blood before they go to that lower pressure. Mainly used these days is called camp out. The night before the 2 EVA astronauts go into the airlock, they shut the door, they lower the pressure just in that area rather than in the entire mission, and then they kind of camp out all night long at that lower pressure, get up in the morning, get on masks, do their activities, get in their suits. This new activity basically is called in-suit light exercise protocol, and exercise is a real stretch. So the morning of, the crew doesn't have to camp out, so the morning of they'll go in, they'll get into their suits, they'll start breathing pure O2 for about 50 minutes, 50 minutes more than they normally. During that exercise, which is really just very slow flexing of their elbows and legs, and so they're going to basically bend their knees a little bit, bend their hips, bend their arms. Like I said, calling it exercise is a stretch. They're not really going to do much at all, but just to get your metabolic rate up a little bit. And then after that 50 minutes, they'll have 50 minutes of rest again. So 100 minutes of pre-breathe will equivalent of having camped out overnight at a lower pressure. You'll still get all the nitrogen out of your system, and operationally it's a much more friendly operational system of pre-breathe than either of the other methods we use, mostly because the crew doesn't have to be camped out by themselves overnight, and you avoid some of the problems, like for example a false smoke alarm on station would cause that airlock to be repressed, which would break the protocol and prevent you from going EVA the next day. This will avoid any of those problems. So both the operations team in Houston and the crew are looking forward to this protocol. We're going to use that on EVA 3 as kind of a test run. Probably use it also on EVA 4 through extensive ground testing and approval through both NASA chain and independent medical chains. So it's a very well approved procedure. We just want to kind of make sure we got the big EVAs behind us, and then we'll try it on the last couple just in case we run into any hiccups. Other than that, the other thing you'll see us do a little different this time, we're flying a sensor in the payload bay called Storm, which is effectively a relative motion sensor that was going to be flown on Orion that we'd use for automated docking. With the shuttle, there's a sensor out there we call TCS, a trajectory control sensor. It's basically a range-finding laser. The Storm payload has a similar thing, but it's a much more active system. So after we undock, we'll do our normal undock, we'll fly around with the space shuttle, and we'll do our separation. And then after that set burn, we'll do a couple more burns to put us on our re-rendezvous profile. Grand total about 4 hours. We'll come back around again and close back in on station using the Storm sensor rather than our TCS sensors. We'll go out about 30,000 feet. If we come back in again, what we call the R bar. So if you think about it, the station will come in directly below the station. That's the same point RPM, the rendezvous pitch maneuver with the shuttle when we come up. The shuttle then kind of transitions up and flies in on what we call the V bar. We're going to come up on that R bar about 1,000 feet away, and then we'll stop and separate away from there. We don't need to go any closer to test out the Storm sensor on this flight. So it'll be a really good hands-on use of some new technology and to demonstrate its capabilities in docking and rendezvous in the future. So that's a little different thing we'll do after we undock. We kind of come back again, take another look at the station, and then head home. All in all, like I said, it's going to be a very busy mission, very packed, and a very exciting one to watch. I'm looking forward to it. But Endeavour and the team are in great shape. I'll let Mike tell you more about how the launch team's ready to go come 10 days from now.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Well, the final processing flow for Endeavour is going extremely well out the pad, especially given the extra days we were given by the program, extra 10 days. Last night we completed the ordnance installation for the different elements, which separates the orbiter from the elements themselves. That's all complete and good. We'll get into the pressurization of the high pressure gas bottles tomorrow night. Rest of the pad flow is really pretty. We have all Easter week. We'll come back in next Monday, close the payload bay doors, and a week from right now we'll be in countdown for STS-134. One thing to mention: at the end of March, we did have some adverse weather out the launch pad that was reviewed in detail throughout the last weeks or so, and in addition today, each element reported out. We had small hail, experienced small hail in the external tank. We also had some high winds. Those were all dispositions. Trying to go, so no issue from the adverse weather if you hear about that. A good, easy launch countdown, a standard countdown for us. We do have a little bit of an O2 offload after PRSD load, but we hope to get to the opening of the launch window Friday the 29th at 15:42 Eastern Time. Endeavour and her team are doing really well for a final flow, very team, and good launch and a good mission. Thanks.
All right, we'll begin with questions here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Please wait for the microphone, state your name and affiliation, and please address to whom you're asking your question, and we'll begin with Marcia.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press. Could one of you just run through the window, what's available if you don't get off on the 29th, and then just sort of refresh us on how June 28th is looking for Atlantis and how that's stacking up?
So let's see, for the launch window, we start on the 29th. There's an Atlas launch coming up on the range on the 6th of May right now, so we would be able to try, if we needed to, all the way through and including the 4th of May before we'd have to stand down for that Atlas launch. As Mike mentioned, with the pad hold we have and the PRSD offload, we'd have to top off, and it would take us more than our normal 48 hours, so the timing lines up pretty good that if we were stretched out that long for some reason, we could reload our cryo and be ready to go on the other side of that window. It would, depending on whether they go on their first or second attempt, we could come back around the 9th or 10th. There's some station Soyuz issues that we may or may not have to address if we come back somewhere around the 9th or so. We'd be coming back for another launch attempt. We'd have to wait and see why we were having the problems in the first place before we could be sure. And then we can go pretty much through the end of May with that launch window. There's some implications to doing so on the station mission we'd really need to make sure we talk about, but it's legal launch window for us if we needed it.
And Atlantis processing is going really well. We're still shooting for a May the 12th roll out of the OPF and out to the launch pad on the 20th. And we have TCD in the 2nd. We have a tanking test planned for the 7th of June. And right now all looks good for the end of June 28th for the final flight.
James.
James Dean from Florida today. Mr. Gerstenmaier, could you give us a status of where you are with the budget after the recent budget deal for the shuttle program? You know, for example, how far could you given the funding that you have available? Is that why you're now sticking with your instead of pushing into the year?
I guess it's really budget driven. We just take a look at what we need to go do, and if the team will fly, is ready, and everybody's trained, I think June 28th is what we've been planning for, and that's kind of where we're aiming. If we need to move a little bit, we'll move a little bit. We're not, overly constrained budget-wise, but there's no big advantage of moving the flight multiple months to us from a hardware availability standpoint. We reviewed in detail the station program, what additional hardware they could fly, there was no big driver one way or the other, so we think the end of June is about the right time to go fly, and we'll just continue to follow the process of crew training, and if something comes up that makes us move, we'll move where we need to move. So we have sufficient budget to do what we need to do.
If some kind of new technical something, is there essentially a deadline, a date by which you would you have to get flown, or you couldn't pull it off anymore?
I don't think there's not a hard constraint. Work it and depend, where we are and see what we need to go do. But we'll let the technical data drive us where we need to, and then I'll work the budget stuff once we understand the technical problems that put. So there's not a financial constraint that says at X date we can't fly beyond that date.
Bill.
Bill Harwood, CBS. Could one of you guys give me the whatever for this flight? I just was curious if the use of this tank changed the numbers even a little bit. I was really looking for the total number and then debris and ascent. Those in your charts.
Let's see, the MMOD, micrometeorite on-orbit debris, or orbital debris risk number was 1 in 277, 279, 275. Anywhere between 275 and 277. Up here in just a sec. That's a little than it would be because we're doing this inspection. Normally we do it about 3 or 4 days before landing. We're doing that. So there's a couple more days that we're exposed to micrometeorite debris that we then don't go look to make sure we didn't get hit. So that makes that risk a little bigger. The other piece is when we're docked to station, the inspection coverage we get is not 100% coverage. There's a few areas that aren't that are deemed low risk on the RCC that we can't see. So that makes that risk number go up because there's a few areas that you couldn't see. So from that standpoint, the number's a little lower, but it was a known risk trade with the gain of leaving the boom behind for station future ops. And we got 1 in 275 is the number.
And then the debris and ascent numbers?
Yeah, they don't present that one to us. We don't compute that one per flight anymore.
Okay.
Yep. And we don't see it. I mean, we looked at it kind of from an overall risk standpoint, and we really don't see a significant difference between this tank and our other tanks. You know, before, but we will see potentially some more foam loss, especially after the aerodynamically sensitive time frame, because we know we have this potential cryo pumping associated with our hydrogen ice frost ramp. So we know we will see some foam loss, but again, it'll be late enough that it doesn't impact any of our risk numbers from an overall standpoint.
Overall risk of 1 in 75 or whatever that number is, that's pretty much the same as always.
Yes.
Yeah, we did review that from an external tank risk is unchanged.
Thanks. And one for Gerst. Where do you guys stand on shoehorning a fly around into 135? I know y'all are looking at that. I know the Russians are, and I know that's a tight schedule with a 4-man crew. So where does that stand?
Well, we're still taking a look at that. We're putting the details of that overall timeline together. The program's made some decisions about what hardware gets transferred back and forth, and that kind of frees some things up. And we'll see how all that fits and see if a fly around works for 130. So we're off evaluating that and see if it makes sense. And it's kind of part of the overall, kind of as we get to the final mission build, or the final timeline tweaks, we're going to go see if that fits for us to go do.
Are the Russians at least amenable going in?
Yeah, I think the Russians are supporting. We're supporting this time, but again with the potential launch of the Soyuz coming up, we wanted to delay the landing to be consistent with the amount of time. We only have 3-person crew on board station to about the same time frame as before. What the Russians would have done for this flight is we docked the Soyuz as part of their return configuration, done the fly around data, and then returned the Soyuz potentially to the ground. The Soyuz late to June 7th. That would allow a longer period on orbit with us at crew. We didn't think that was the right thing to do from a station utilization standpoint. We want to keep our crew at 6 as long as we can. So we asked the Russians to delay that landing, which they've agreed to do, to keep the same amount of time where we're down at 3-person crew. So that's why we moved the fly around off of STS-134, and then at the same time we asked the Russians for 135, but we need to look at it from an overall timeline standpoint to make sure we don't put too much pressure on the crew with only the 4-person crew there on 135. So I'd say that's normal work in front of us. We'll evaluate that in the next couple of weeks.
We have some reporters in Houston, so we'll take one more question here, then go to Houston, and then come back. Go ahead, please.
Jackie Goddard for the Times of London, and it's a question for Mike Lineback, if I may. The workforce here seems to have such a close and respectful bond with the shuttle. It seems a very emotional attachment there. Can you tell us how people are coping with the prospect of the end of the program, and what the mood and atmosphere is here?
Well, the mood I'd say has been consistent over the last several months, in that we know the end is coming and we're dealing with it. We did have a layoff last Friday, a week ago, 535 people. So that put a little bit of a somber mood on the team, I'd say. But we're dealing with it. We have sufficient workforce to get all the work done and launch this thing and land it. And the next one, the emotional aspect is very, very real, and it's very difficult to put into words. But I think all of Kennedy Space Center got a big boost when we got the word that we were going to be able to keep Atlantis here. And so we're looking forward to that, the ultimate display of the ultimate spaceship here at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center.
Okay, let's go to Houston and see if we have any questions there, please.